Amid the snowbound peaks of the Sierra Nevada, the name Donner lingers like a curse. In the winter of 1846, a wagon party was trapped in the storms, forced to consume one another to survive. Locals whisper that whenever a blizzard rises, the old cabin where they once huddled flares to life again. Inside, withered skeletons sit eternally around the table, beckoning lost travelers to join a feast without end, where the meat is always warm. Eerie. The storm came without warning, swallowing the Sierra Nevada in a suffocating white sea. Nathan, leading his group of 3 hikers, fought to find a path through the leaning pines, but the blizzard erased every trace of the trail. Their breaths puffed out in frozen clouds, each step sinking thigh-deep into the snow. Nightfall dropped swiftly, draping the mountains in a dim, oppressive shroud. The cold sliced through skin and bone, numbing Nathan's fingers even through his gloves. Hunger gnawed at them, tremors racked their bodies, and fear seeped in with every step. They no longer knew which direction led back to camp. All that remained was the sensation of being swallowed alive by a labyrinth of ice. Just as despair took hold, a shape loomed through the storm. A weather-beaten cabin, roof sagging under a heavy crown of snow, its doorway nearly buried. Nathan stumbled forward, shouldered open the groaning door, and was met by a gust of air thick with mildew, rotting wood, and the faint tang of old smoke. Inside, weak light filtered through cracks, falling on layers of dust. The cabin was cramped, its timber walls split with age, yet it still bore the trace of human habitation. Around a mold-stained table sat 3 skeletons, slumped as if caught mid-meal. Their hollow sockets bored into the gloom, jaws sagging open as though their final words had frozen in their throats. In the corner, the stone hearth lay long extinguished, though the blackened ash still clung like a shadow. Scattered across the floor were fragments of bone half buried in dirt. The place did not feel abandoned. It felt paused, arranged by some unseen hand only moments before, waiting for the next act to begin. The wind outside shrieked through the gaps in the walls, stretching into a mournful moan. Nathan stood frozen, the chill of the rotting boards seeping into his legs. Death had never left this cabin. It was only waiting for the next soul to step inside. Night fell faster than they expected. Outside, the blizzard screamed and smothered the entrance, sealing the cabin into their only refuge. Nathan and his 2 companions fed the hearth with rotting timber. The fire cracked to life, casting a jaundiced glow across the warped wooden walls, illuminating the 3 skeletons still seated in silence around the table. The air was thick with damp and mildew, but soon something else began to seep through. At first, it was only the faint tang of ancient ash. Then, as the flames roared brighter, a greasy scent spread, sharp and cloying, like burning fat. Nathan frowned. None of them carried food. And yet, the unmistakable odor of roasting flesh filled the room. A sound stirred near the hearth. At first, the faint pop of splintering wood. Then a steady clack, clack, clack. The cadence of a knife striking a cutting board. An old pot balanced on the stones began to tremble, rattling softly before exploding in a metallic clang, as though an unseen hand had hurled a spoon against its side. They froze. The cabin was small, every corner visible, yet no figure stood there. Only the lifeless relics quivered in the firelight, animated by some invisible force. Nathan swallowed hard, telling himself it was only exhaustion conjuring illusions. But then the pot's lid snapped open, revealing ash gone cold, and within it, charred fragments of bone. A ribbon of smoke uncoiled upward, twisting like a beckoning finger before dissolving into the gloom, leaving behind a stench of scorched flesh that thickened the air. Footsteps followed, soft, deliberate, dragging, circling the table. The skeletons remained unmoving in their chairs, but the empty space between them seemed to swell with a darkness more solid than shadow. On the table, a cracked wooden bowl inched forward, scraping until it halted before Nathan. In the shifting firelight, it looked freshly placed, as though by a host eager to serve. The wood even seemed warm to the touch. Outside, the storm howled, like a starving beast. Inside, the air pressed heavy and close, suffocating, charged with the quiet anticipation of invisible guests, preparing a feast not meant for the living. By me. The fire roared higher, though they had fed it nothing more. Its sickly glow spilled across the warped walls, stretching shadows into grotesque shapes. For an instant, it seemed the skeletons hunched at the table were stirring, necks lolling forward, then snapping upright again in the blink of an eye. Nathan rubbed his eyes, blaming exhaustion, but when he looked back, the table had transformed. The cracked wooden bowls, empty when they first entered, now brimmed with steaming cuts of meat. Thick, red, glistening slices, releasing a savory scent that clawed at their starved stomachs. Hunger stabbed at Nathan's gut like needles, wearing down every instinct to resist. One of his companions, weaker than the rest, trembled as he reached for a piece. In the firelight, it resembled venison or wild boar, something plausible in these mountains. He shoved it into his mouth, chewing greedily, teeth grinding with frantic abandon. At first, Nathan only felt envy at the sound of flesh between his companion's teeth. But then, the firelight shifted, and Nathan saw it. Embedded in the glossy meat was a scorched fingernail, jutting from pale sinew. A long, charred strand of hair clung to his friend's lip, singed and acrid. The man didn't notice, only chewed faster, eyes bulging, face flushed in delirious satisfaction. Nathan's breath caught, his blood running cold. He tried to scream, but his throat was sandpaper, too dry to form sound. More platters appeared on the table, neatly arranged, still steaming. What had smelled rich now reeked of roasted flesh and burnt blood. The cabin shifted. From the corners rose whispers, at first single syllables, then twisted invitations, lullabies warped and muffled as if sung through soil. Each murmur raised the hair on Nathan's skin, as though the rotten floor itself was pleading. And then came another sound, the wail of a child. Thin, relentless, muffled as though it seeped up from beneath the boards. The air turned brittle with cold. Nathan looked back, and his heart froze. One of the skeletons had moved. Its skull, once slumped, was now lifted, eyeless hollows fixed on him. Its jaw worked soundlessly, yet its rhythm matched the whispers surrounding them. The chair groaned under its shifting weight, as if it prepared to rise. The second friend collapsed into sobs, clutching his head, babbling nonsense. His gaze flicked from the food to the bone figures, and then, in a frenzy, he lunged at the table. He snatched up a half-burnt femur, still streaked with flesh, and sank his teeth in. Blackened blood oozed down his chin, pattering onto the wood below. The cabin shook. Pots and pans clattered like war drums, their tempo quickening, urging. Footsteps, dozens, heavy and hurried, circled them, closing the trap. Nathan understood then. The banquet had never ended. The Donna dead, once starving, once cannibals, remained. The bones were husks, Their spirits lingered, hosting, serving, waiting for strays to join their feast. His vision blurred. In a blink, the cabin swarmed with gaunt phantoms, skin shredded, jaws working, mouths smeared crimson, hands reaching. The skeletons rose from their chairs, vertebrae cracking, heads twisting at impossible angles, welcoming the newcomers. Nathan staggered back, his spine pressed to the icy wall. But he knew there was no escape. The cabin's door was gone, swallowed by the dark. Only the fire remained, burning bright and red, lighting the endless feast of the starving dead who hammered their rhythm, calling him to the table. The cabin was no longer a refuge. It had become a living banquet hall. Fire roared in the hearth, casting the walls in a frenzy of dancing shadows, shapes of shredded bodies swaying and gnawing, though in truth only 3 living men remained. Yet, to Nathan, the room was overflowing with guests. Invisible diners leaned close to their feast, every eyeless stare fixed upon him. The first companion, the one who had eaten first, slumped over the table, his shoulders jerking in violent spasms. His spine jutted sharp against his skin as ragged flesh tore open, exposing the raw meat beneath. Nathan watched in horror as ribs surfaced, splitting through as though some unseen butcher worked from within. But no blood spilled, only the choking perfume of fat sizzling on coals, sweet and rancid, filling every breath. The second friend still clutched his charred bone, but now a hoarse laughter bubbled from his throat. His eyes clouded white, his tongue lolling, black blood dribbling down his chin. When he lifted his head, Nathan recoiled. His face was collapsing inward, cheeks hollowing, teeth lengthening into jagged fangs. Rents in his flesh stretched wider, splitting to reveal a second mouth, yawning across his throat. The whispers surged, clearer than before. Sit with us. Eat with us. Hungry? Lost one? Their voices slithered into Nathan's skull, weaving with the gnawing ache in his belly. His hands trembled. Even knowing the source, the scent of roasting meat made his jaw ache with want, saliva filling his mouth against his will. Across the table, a bowl slid toward him. Inside, a slab of charred flesh still dripped with grease, hissing as it struck the wood. Nathan shook his head, backing away, but the unseen diners pressed closer. Footsteps shuffled all around, slow and circling. Cold breath slid along his neck, whispering hunger. The second friend screamed suddenly, head snapping back with a crack of bone. Then he dropped forward, plunging his face into the platter, tearing chunks with his new-grown fangs. The sound of chewing filled the cabin, obscene and animal. Nathan saw him not as a man, but as the latest guest welcomed to the dinner table. Everywhere, jaws worked, teeth cracked bone. The skeletons had risen now, their empty sockets following Nathan's every movement. Their jaws hung open in wide, grinning invitations. With a gesture, they beckoned. With their silence, they commanded. Nathan doubled over, clutching his stomach as hunger twisted into agony. Something gnawed at him from inside. The meat before him blurred, then sharpened again, shimmering golden, almost holy in its allure. A whisper brushed against his ear, so close it seemed spoken from his own skull. If you do not eat, you will be eaten. Nathan staggered back until his shoulders struck the wall. He knew the truth now. In the Donner cabin, there was no escape, no mercy. One either sat down to eat, or became the meal. Nathan forced himself to stand in the circle of shadows, stomach writhing as the scent of roasted flesh clung to every breath. The whispers surged, relentless, pounding like a drum beat in his skull. "Sit down. Eat. Join us." The skeletal figures circled the table, jaws clattering like funeral drums. The first companion was nothing more than a husk now, face buried in his plate, black smoke curling from his back, as though his body smoldered from within. The second, no longer human, lifted his head, eyes milky white, mouth split wide to his ears. He held out a glistening hunk of red meat toward Nathan, blood dripping onto the wooden floor in steady taps. Nathan croaked a dry scream, shaking his head, but his throat was too parched, his knees buckled with weakness. And then he heard it, another voice whispering beside his ear. Not a stranger's voice, but his own, warped and echoing from the dark. "You've already chosen. The table never runs out of chairs." Strength drained from him. He collapsed into the waiting chair. At once, the empty bowl before him filled, piled high with steaming flesh, the aroma suffocating. The skeletons pounded their bony hands against the table in ghoulish celebration, the clatter rising like a cheer. Firelight flickered over Nathan's face as it changed, eyes sinking into hollows, skin blanched, jaw twitching in spasms. His trembling fingers lifted a morsel to his lips. The moment his teeth pierced the meat, the cabin shuddered as if exhaling in relief. The whispers fell silent, replaced by a chorus of chewing, wet, relentless, eternal. Nathan's own sounds joined them. The grind of teeth through tendon, the convulsions of his throat as he swallowed. Outside, the storm ebbed. Dawn spread its pale shroud across the Sierra Nevada, and the cabin grew still again. Its door remained buried, its timbers dark, no trace of life left within. Only the table endured, set neatly with 3 skeletons, sitting in solemn vigil. On the 4th chair sat a new figure, rigid and pale, eyes hollow, jaw agape in a permanent invitation. The wind slipped through the cracks in the wall, carrying the faintest murmur. "We are still waiting." "Ah, woo." My name is Claire. This happened in 2016. I was 19 years old at the time. I was up late the night before into the early morning studying, and I hadn't had much sleep. So I had just woken up from a nap and decided to hop in the shower to wake myself up. That's when I heard this weird scraping sound coming from somewhere outside. I stopped the shower, peered out from behind the curtain, and then made my way over to the window. I saw nothing, but I could still hear the noise. I thought it may have been my neighbor working in a shed, so I ignored the disturbance and finished up in the shower. Before I continue, I should explain that I have severe anxiety and often get a little paranoid. It doesn't help that I also have PTSD. Anyway, I was now back in my room and sat down on my bed. I texted my boyfriend at the time and asked him what he wanted for dinner. While I waited for him to respond, I relaxed and scrolled through social media. I was reading an article about the recent clown sightings that were happening at the time when I was interrupted by the sound of footsteps outside. I froze and listened carefully. A few more steps followed, then a tapping noise. I was confused. It hadn't yet occurred to me that I might have an unwelcome guest outside. I wondered why my boyfriend hadn't knocked on the door or called before showing up. We had a routine. He would always text, call, or video chat me to let me know when he was coming home or when he was at the door. There had been a lot of shady activity in our neighborhood recently, so this routine was important. I called out his name, but everything went silent. I texted him and asked if he was at the door. No reply. I decided to peek through the bedroom window. As I made my way across the room, my phone rang. It was him, wanting to video chat. When I answered, he said he was about 15 minutes away. As I talked to him, I pulled back the curtains of my bedroom window, and all the blood in my veins turned to ice. Right outside, staring back at me, was a clown. A real clown, smiling through the glass. After the initial shock, I actually laughed, thinking it had to be some kind of prank my boyfriend was pulling on me. I played along, pretending to be terrified, whispering into the phone, "Very funny. Love the whole scary clown thing." I chuckled and rolled my eyes. But my boyfriend was confused. I explained about the clown at the window and told him he and his friends had done a good job scaring me. He swore all his friends were at the pub with him and insisted he wasn't part of any prank. My stomach dropped. I looked back at the window. The clown was still there, grinning. Then he reached into his costume and pulled out what looked like a butcher's knife. My body froze. I grabbed a baseball bat from beside my bed. My boyfriend yelled that he was only a few minutes away now and told me to lock all doors and windows. I quickly closed the curtains and ran into the lounge. Soon I heard a loud pounding on the front door. A creepy voice called out, "Let me in, child." I didn't answer. I stood still, heart pounding. The door rattled on its hinges as the clown pounded again. The doorknob shook violently. My fear was growing, but so was my anger. I shouted back, "Go away! Leave me alone!" A muffled laugh followed. The voice returned, even creepier. "Please let me in, doll. I just want to play. I want to play with your insides." My patience snapped. I was about to storm outside and confront him when I heard my boyfriend, still on the phone, yell, "Hang up and call the cops!" I hesitated, then realized he was right. Facing a clown with a butcher's knife wasn't the best idea. I called the police, explaining the situation as I walked back toward my room. That's when I heard glass shatter. I froze. I told the dispatcher I thought the clown had broken in. The dispatcher told me to get somewhere safe. Suddenly, I heard my boyfriend's voice outside shouting, "Hey, what the hell are you doing? Get out of here. The police are coming." The clown let out a psychotic laugh and ran off. I rushed back to the bedroom, and that's when I noticed movement outside again. Through a small gap in the curtains, I saw another clown, this one holding a saw blade. My body locked up. I couldn't move or scream. My fear deepened as I realized my boyfriend was out there with not one but two clowns. I screamed into the phone, begging him to hurry. After what felt like forever, I heard him at the back door. I let him in quickly, and we clung to each other until the police arrived. They took our statements and found a rusted hacksaw and an axe on the ground outside my bedroom window. There were red stains on them. The clowns, of course, were nowhere to be found. After that night, I struggled to fall asleep. I often wonder what would have happened if I had been foolish enough to open the door. Were they just thrill seekers trying to scare a girl home alone? Or were they truly out for blood? A few months later, my grandparents passed away within weeks of each other, leaving their old house empty. At first, the family discussed renting it out, but its poor condition made that impossible. With no consensus, it was left to decay. Years later, while going through my mother's things with my aunt, we came across a family photo album. In one picture, I saw myself as a baby with my mother, standing in front of a house I didn't recognize. My aunt explained it was the old family home. No one had been there in over a decade, and she wasn't even sure if it was still standing. I begged her to take me there. After some hesitation, she agreed. The next morning, we drove 30 miles through cornfields to a gravel road. At the top of the hill, I gasped. Despite being run down, the house was breathtaking. In its prime, it must have been the finest in the county. We parked near it, got out, and looked around. The once vibrant paint was faded, the porch sagged, and the grounds were overgrown. Yet the house still carried a haunting beauty. We entered through the back. Immediately, a terrible odor hit us, but we brushed it off as the smell of a sealed house. Inside, everything looked like a time capsule. My grandmother's belongings were untouched, the furniture covered in dust. Even the lights still worked, though dimly. I later learned my mother had quietly kept the utilities paid all these years, hoping someone might return. We wandered room to room, taking in the old furnishings. I couldn't understand why no one had told me about the place. Despite our estrangements, I would have helped care for it. My mother's strange ways had always kept her distant from me, but the neglect still shocked me. Upstairs, the smell grew stronger. I wanted to cut the visit short, but curiosity pulled me toward a closed door. I opened it slightly. A wave of stench slapped me in the face. On the bed was not an animal, but a human body. Bloated, unrecognizable, curled up in silence. My knees buckled. I stumbled away and shouted for my aunt. She peeked in and immediately pulled back, horrified. Together, we ran downstairs, where the smell was weaker, and called the police. When the officers arrived, they searched the room and came back with a piece of paper and a license. They sat us down and asked questions about my mother. My chest tightened. The officer looked grim. He told us the body appeared to be hers. I refused to believe it until he handed me her license. My world collapsed. My aunt and I clung to each other, sobbing. After giving us a moment, the officer handed me a note. It was from her. In it, she confessed to years of depression, worsened by our estrangements. Our last argument had pushed her past the edge. She returned to the old house, unsure at first, but its condition broke her completely. Her final words begged me not to blame myself, and ended with a simple, heartbreaking goodbye. Weeks later, once the grief had settled, I gathered the family. I proposed we restore the house, to turn our tragedy into something meaningful. They agreed. It took time, but by spring of 2018, the Wheeler house was reborn. I led the first tour myself. It was a bittersweet day. My mother should have been there with me. Despite everything, it was her dream that made it possible. Years later, another event burned itself into my memory. I was 20 then in 2005. My father had been diagnosed with lung cancer, and we were devastated. He had given me his rifle years earlier, and I decided to take it on a solo hunting trip to clear my mind. I set up camp near the borderlands. The first day was uneventful. That night, lying by my truck and staring at the stars, I heard footsteps in the brush. My instinct screamed danger. I rolled aside just in time to see muzzle flashes. Bullets ripped into the dirt where I had been lying. I dove behind my truck, pulling the small pistol strapped to my ankle. Shots shattered my truck window. I returned fire blindly, heart pounding. After a tense silence, I heard multiple sets of footsteps fleeing into the darkness. I stayed under the truck all night, my pistol aimed at the trees. When dawn came, I packed up fast and left. Later, a friend told me the area was being used by cartel groups to smuggle goods and people. If I hadn't moved, I might not have lived to tell the story. Even now, I can't shake what happened in my apartment not long after. I lived in a gated complex in the city. It was considered safe, but security was loose. That night, I went to bed late, only to be awakened by a strange clicking sound. At first, I thought it was upstairs neighbors. Then I realized it was coming from my front door. Someone was trying to unlock it. I grabbed my pistol from the safe and aimed at the door. The lock clicked open, but the deadbolt held. I peered through the peephole. 3 strangers stood outside, 2 men and a woman, all in hoodies. The men held objects I couldn't identify. The woman kept repeating something loudly in another language, over and over, including an apartment number that didn't even exist in the complex. I jammed the door with a broom handle, making a loud thud to show I was there. They froze, then fled down the hall. I debated calling the police, but waited until the next day to report it. Nothing came of it. Still, I can't forget how the deadbolt was the only thing between me and those strangers. I was prepared to do what was necessary. And though I'll never know their intentions, I am proud of how calm I remained, ready to face the unthinkable. Sarah Miller had always believed she was finally stepping into the kind of life she had worked so hard to earn. At 24, she was fresh out of nursing school, now employed at St. Mary's Hospital in the small town where she had grown up. Her days were exhausting, her nights irregular, but she found comfort in the fact that she never had to come home to an empty house. John Carter, her boyfriend of 3 years, lived with her. He wasn't ambitious the way Sarah was, but he was dependable, warm, and endlessly patient. He worked nights at a supermarket across town, stacking shelves and driving deliveries. It wasn't glamorous, but Sarah didn't care. In her heart, they were as good as married. Their home was a modest 1-story house tucked into the edge of a quiet suburban neighborhood. During the day, sunlight streamed in through the windows and warmed the pale wooden floors. At night, the house seemed to shrink into itself, leaving Sarah alone with the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the old beams. She had grown used to it. John often teased her about being nervous when she was alone. "Don't worry," he would say with that crooked grin. "No matter what happens, I'll always come back to you." It had sounded romantic at the time, but on one particular night, those words began to echo with a different weight. "No, undone me, and this shadi undone one." The night was cold and damp, the kind of night that pressed fog against the windows and made streetlights glow like weak lanterns in a storm. John left for work late, muttering about losing track of time. Sarah leaned on the doorframe as he pulled on his jacket. "You're tired," she said. "You should have taken the earlier shift. This road is awful at night." John kissed her on the forehead, brushing away her concern. "I'll be fine. Get some rest. I'll see you in the morning." The door clicked shut behind him. John's car, a faded silver sedan, hummed down the narrow 2-lane road that cut through the wooded outskirts of town. The wipers squealed against the windshield as drizzle turned to heavier rain. He tapped his fingers against the steering wheel, humming along to a tune on the radio to keep himself awake. Then something moved. It was quick, darting across the road, a dark figure, human-like but indistinct in the fog. John's heart lurched. He swerved sharply, tires screaming on the slick asphalt. The headlights swung across the trees. The impact came with a violent crunch of metal against wood. Glass exploded. His head slammed forward. For a moment, the world was only the sound of rain and the faint hiss of the dying radio. And then, silence. Wow. At home, Sarah had already changed into her pajamas and curled up on the couch with a medical journal. She was trying to force her tired brain to review a chapter on emergency procedures. The house was quiet, except for the steady ticking of the clock above the TV. Her eyelids were heavy when a sound jolted her back to awareness. Clack, dot. It was the sound of the front door unlocking. Sarah blinked, confused. She hadn't heard a car pull up. She was certain she had locked the door earlier. Slowly, she set her book aside and stood. The hallway stretched dark before her. She padded forward, every step reluctant. And then she saw him. John stood in the open doorway. For a second, Sarah's relief flooded her, but almost instantly it was replaced with dread. His clothes were torn, soaked in something dark. His skin was pale, his lips split and bloodied. Raindrops clung to his hair, and his eyes seemed dull, as though the spark she knew so well had been dimmed. "John!" she gasped, rushing forward. "Oh my God, what happened?" He stared at her blankly before offering a strange, stilted answer. "I fell. Just wanted to come home." His voice was flat, detached. Sarah wrapped her arm around him, guiding him inside. "You're hurt. You need to go to the hospital." But John didn't resist, didn't explain. He allowed her to pull him inside, peel off his wet clothes, and hand him a clean shirt and sweatpants. His movements were stiff, almost mechanical. When he was dressed, he didn't head to bed or even the bathroom. He simply walked into the living room, sat heavily on the couch, and turned on the television. The screen buzzed with static. Sarah frowned. The cable must be out again. But John didn't change the channel. He didn't even blink. He stared at the white noise as though it were a program only he could see. The air in the room grew colder. Sarah tugged her sweater tighter around herself and rubbed her arms. She could see her breath misting in the air, though the heater hummed softly in the background. She sat beside John cautiously. "John, are you sure you're okay? You're scaring me." No answer. Only the faint rise and fall of his chest, as though each breath was an effort. Then he made a noise. A low, guttural rasp. Dot. It wasn't a cough. It wasn't even human. Sarah's skin prickled. Her eyes darted to the TV screen again. For a split second, she thought she saw his reflection in the static. His face twisted into an impossible grin, eyes hollow and black. She blinked, and it was gone. Her throat tightened. "John," she whispered. He turned his head toward her, but his lips never moved. His eyes seemed to smile, though his face remained expressionless. Fear washed through her chest. She rose quickly, muttering, "I'll get you some water." The phone rang. Its shrill tone shattered the suffocating silence. Sarah jumped, clutching her chest. She hurried to the kitchen, snatched the receiver, and pressed it to her ear. "Miss Miller," a man's voice said. "This is Officer Daniels with the county police. I'm afraid I have some bad news. Your boyfriend, John Carter, was in an accident tonight. His car hit a tree. He didn't make it. His body has been transferred to St. Mary's Hospital morgue." Sarah's vision blurred. The phone slipped against her cheek. "What?" she breathed. Her eyes slowly turned toward the living room doorway. Through the gap, she could see John, still sitting on the couch, still staring at the static screen. He was smiling. The voice on the phone repeated her name, but Sarah barely heard it. Her hands trembled as she lowered the receiver. Her knees buckled, and she staggered back against the wall. The realization crashed down on her. Whatever was in her living room, it wasn't John. Her heart hammered so loudly it drowned out the ticking clock. She locked herself in the bedroom, every nerve screaming with panic. She pressed her ear to the door, but no sound came from the living room, only silence. After what felt like an eternity, she gathered the courage to peek out. The couch was empty. The TV was off. John was gone. Sarah's entire body shook as she grabbed her car keys. She had to get to the hospital. She had to see for herself. And yet, even as she stepped into the night, she swore she could still hear his voice, faint and lingering in her ear. "Didn't I tell you, no matter what happens, I'll always come back to you?" The night air outside was damp and heavy, clinging to Sarah's skin as she rushed to her car. Her hands shook so badly she dropped her keys twice before sliding into the driver's seat. The streets were nearly empty. The only sound was the engine's steady rumble and the thud of her heartbeat echoing in her ears. Every shadow along the roadside seemed to move, stretching and shifting in the dim glow of the headlights. Her breath came in shallow gasps. She gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. "He's gone," she told herself. "That wasn't him. It couldn't have been him." But the memory of John's pale smile in the glow of the TV gnawed at her. The way the air had chilled, the guttural noise from his throat, the impossible reflection in the screen. Sarah blinked hard, trying to focus on the road. That was when she saw it. A figure. Someone was standing at the roadside, barely visible in the fog. At first, she thought it might be a lost traveler. Against her better judgment, she slowed the car. The headlights slid over the figure, revealing the face. Her blood ran cold. It was John. His skin was gray and torn. Blood streaked down his temple and soaked his shirt. His mouth twisted into something between a grimace and a smile. His hand lifted weakly, beckoning her. "Sarah." His voice rasped, cracked, and inhuman. "Help me. Take me home." Sarah screamed, stomping on the accelerator. The car roared forward, but the voice didn't fade. It grew louder. It surrounded her. "Sarah, Sarah, help me." She clutched the wheel, tears blurring her vision. But the voice pressed on, now inside the car itself, as though John sat beside her, behind her, everywhere at once. "Sarah, I'm cold. Sarah, don't leave me. Sarah." Her sobs turned to gasps as panic overtook her. She swerved, tires screeching. The headlights caught the silver curve of the guardrail too late. Crash! Metal shrieked. Glass shattered. The world spun. Darkness swallowed everything. Sarah woke to the beeping of monitors. The antiseptic sting of a hospital ward filled her nose. Her head throbbed, her body bruised. Beside her bed sat Officer Daniels, the same voice she had heard on the phone. His uniform looked too sharp for such a weary face. "You're safe now," he said softly. "You were lucky. A passerby found you early this morning." Sarah's lips trembled. It wasn't luck. John, he came back. He was here. He was in my house, in my car. Her voice broke. Daniels frowned, his brow creasing with the restrained patience of a man used to grief. "Miss Miller, I know this is hard, but John died in that accident. Sometimes the mind plays tricks when—" "No!" Sarah snapped, tears streaking down her face. "I saw him. I heard him. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't my imagination." Her hands shook as she clutched at the sheets. Daniels didn't argue further. Instead, after a moment's silence, he said gently, "Would you like to see him? Sometimes." The corridors of the hospital seemed colder than usual as Sarah followed Daniels into the basement level. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting shadows that stretched too far. A coroner pulled back the sheet. There lay John. His skin was pale, his body broken yet unmistakably lifeless. His eyes were closed, his mouth slack. The stillness of him was worse than any horror she had seen. Sarah crumpled against the gurney, sobbing. She reached for his hand, but it was icy and stiff beneath her touch. There was no warmth left in him. For the first time since the nightmare began, she believed, truly believed, that he was gone. Nay, oh. That night, Sarah returned to her empty house. She was too numb to notice the shadows clinging heavier to the corners, too exhausted to care that the ticking of the clock seemed slightly off, too slow. She collapsed into bed, her mind replaying the image of John's face in the morgue. At midnight, the clock struck 12. Knock, 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 God. Her eyes shot open. She lay frozen, the blankets pulled tight to her chin, her ears strained in the silence. Then came the voice, a whisper, raspy and hollow, seeping through the door like smoke. "Sarah." Her heart hammered. "Sarah, open the door. Help me." Tears welled in her eyes. She clamped her hands over her mouth to keep from screaming. The voice grew stronger, more insistent, more desperate. "Didn't I tell you? No matter what happens, I'll always come back to you." The knocking resumed, slow and deliberate, echoing through the empty house. Knock, knock, knock. Sarah slid off the bed, her legs trembling as she crept toward the door. Each step felt like a choice she couldn't undo. Her hand hovered over the knob. The air was freezing, each breath clouding before her lips. On the other side, the voice whispered again, so close she could almost feel his lips at her ear. "Sarah!" She shut her eyes, tears streaming down her face. And the house went silent. Nada.
This happened on a Norwegian peninsula when I was about 15 years old. It must have been 2006, give or take a year. Regardless, it was Halloween night and I didn't really have any plans. Too old for trick-or-treating, too young for partying. It was a small peninsula anyway, so there wasn't much going on. I was just sat at home playing RuneScape on my desktop. This continued until sundown. You could say I was mildly addicted to that game. I usually like to play with the lights off. Bad for your eyes, but I like the mood it set. Anyway, it's around 9 p.m. My mom comes into my room and pats me on the shoulder. "Didn't you hear me? I said I'm going out for 20 minutes, she said. I had my noise-canceling headphones on, so I was oblivious to the fact that she had been shouting to me. She heads downstairs and I hear the door slam. I put my headphones back on and sink back into my own little pixelated world. As such, I can't really tell you how much time passed when this happened. When you looked out of my bedroom door, which at the time was wide open, you could see down into the long corridor leading to my mum's room opposite. Since all of the lights were off, I could only really make out the outlines of all the objects. And that was only after my eyes adjusted after looking at the bright computer screen. Until then, it was like looking into a dark void of total blackness. You know when one of your senses has picked up on something that you're not totally conscious of yet, and you feel a little uneasy? Well, that happened to me while I was playing. It felt like someone else was around me, like that "I'm being watched" sensation. I figure my mum came back from wherever she went, and that I just hadn't heard her due to my headphones. But if that was the case, why hadn't she turned the lights on? I looked down into the dark corridor. At the far end, something's glowing. It's large and fluorescent green. It's spherical. Looks like a floating orb of some kind. I freak out and whip off my headphones. After looking at it for a moment, it becomes clear that this isn't an orb at all, or anything supernatural like that. There's 2 black holes where eyes should be, and a dark slit for a mouth. It's a glow-in-the-dark mask, and it's not floating. Someone's wearing it. Whoever it is, he is facing me. I can't make out the rest of their body, but the head is definitely looking in my direction and is slowly inching closer. It's some sort of distorted, expressionless face. It's hard to describe, but the image of it is burned deep into my memory. Realizing he's been spotted, the guy freezes. We just stare at each other for what felt like the longest time. He raises a finger up to the lips of his mask. "I'm just a trick-or-treater." It's a thick, manly voice, one I didn't recognize. In a state of shock and not really knowing how to react, I just sit there, keeping my eyes on him. "So, trick or treat," I mumble out. "Neither. Please go now." But he doesn't go. The glowing face starts moving towards me. Desperate to keep him out of my bedroom, I leap up and slam my door closed, locking it and pressing the full weight of my body against it. The guy is just outside my door. I can hear his deep breaths on the other side. He tries the door handle. It rattles. More heavy breaths. He tries the handle again. Then suddenly there's a loud bang. Something heavy slams against the door. Once, twice, again and again, like he's using a hammer or his fists to break through. The wood creaks, the hinges groan. I'm sobbing, begging out loud for him to stop, whispering, "Please, please go away." The pounding grows louder, faster, the door shaking violently under my weight. For a second, I think it's going to come off the hinges and he'll be inside. Then, just as I hear one final massive slam, there's the distant wail of a police siren passing outside on the road. Instantly, everything goes silent. No more pounding, no more heavy breaths, just silence so deep it made my ears ring. After what felt like minutes of stillness, I hear hurried footsteps retreating down the stairs, then the front door opening and slamming shut. Still in shock, I just sit in my barricaded room, sobbing to myself until my mum finally returns. It felt like forever since I'd last seen her. She asked me what was wrong, why I was crying, and why there was a large Hessian sack left in the corridor. I told her what had just happened. She called the police for me immediately. I like to think that this was just a crazy person and that they didn't really have any intention of harming me, just some sort of messed up Halloween prank. Whatever the case, it was a surreal experience, and the image of that floating, talking face has haunted me for the longest time. The most unnerving part about this to me, though, is the fact that the peninsula really was very small. For me to see a face around town that I didn't recognize was very rare. More than likely, someone in my family knew who this person was. Hell, I probably knew who it was. I hate to think that after that event, I may very well have interacted with that person. The thought that they specifically targeted me out of everyone in the area made me extremely uncomfortable. I never felt safe there after that. That's part of the reason I moved away when I was 18. One time I received an invite to a website after chatting with some guy online. He told me it was something he thought I'd really like. Not really knowing what to expect, I followed the link. This was, as you probably expect, a mistake. The link took me to a site with just a video on it. The images were very poor quality and very grainy. In the video, there were 4 Chinese guys sat around a table in some crummy apartment. I'm pretty sure they were all drunk, and one of them was resting his head in his arms against the table. As the camera occasionally dipped downwards, you could see that the floor area beneath them was covered in a tarp. Nothing much else was happening. I wanted to skip forward because I was getting bored, but that's when I realized that you couldn't. This was a live stream. The guy who sent me the link said to keep waiting and just give it 5 minutes. So I popped open another tab whilst I waited and checked back on the stream every so often. At one point, when I clicked back on the video, there were only 3 of them sat around the table, and a box had appeared above the video. The words in this text box were all in Chinese. I'm pretty sure it was Chinese at least. But I remember very distinctly that there were 4 boxes, each with numbers in them that kept changing. I didn't think much of that at first. Not long afterwards, the 4th guy returns to the table. He was now holding a revolver in his hands. He sat back down at the table with the other men and placed the gun on the table. You could hear the guy holding the camera saying something, but obviously I didn't understand what. He sounded very aggressive in his tone, though. That's all I could really discern. Then there were a couple of other voices coming off camera, chiming in too. The guy at the table who had brought the gun grunted something and spun the pistol on the table. That's when I realized this was a live game of Russian roulette for some sort of gambling website. People would stake their bitcoins on what I assume was a 4-to-1 bet. That's what the changing numbers were at the top of the screen. The Chinese characters must have referred to the different guys at the table, and I assume the changing numbers were the amount of cash being staked on each player. Whether the money wagered was for that man to live or die is something that I can't answer. It was like something out of The Deer Hunter. I couldn't believe it. But these guys didn't look like they'd been captured and forced against their will to play. They just looked like tired businessmen. Maybe they were a group of desperados who really needed cash. Or maybe they really were forced. I don't really know. I should have stopped watching at that point, but I guess I'm a glutton for punishment. The guy who the gun ended up pointing at put it against his head and pulled the trigger. The chamber was empty, so he was okay. Then the next guy took the gun from him. He didn't even fucking hesitate to stick the gun in his mouth and pull. There was a brief flash. I don't know if anyone has seen the Bud Dwyer video, but it reminded me of that in the sense that there was a fucking fountain of blood coming out of his head. One little detail I remember was a small amount of smoke rising out of the man's mouth and nostrils as he collapsed back in his chair. A couple of people from off-camera came in and dragged him away in his chair. I turned that shit off immediately after seeing that. I don't know if that's a regular thing that happens on that site, or whether this was some type of one-off event that had somehow been advertised on the deep web to attract an audience. I do think about that video from time to time, along with a few other ones that I've seen. Like I said, this shit stays with you.